At 20, you live as if the possibilities were endless. At 30, it begins to feel the weight of each choice. It is in this transition that life places before you its true nature, a being constantly called to respond. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the concentration camps and creator of Logotherapy, stated that even when everything is taken us, we have a fundamental freedom to choose our attitude in the face of circumstances. It is exactly this freedom that becomes more visible and necessary after 30. Not as a distant philosophical comfort, but as a concrete force that defines who we really are. Until this phase, many of our decisions have been taken under the illusion that time is abundant. We chose careers, relationships, and paths without completely realizing the meaning of each yes and every no. We live reacting external expectations, social pressures, and models that we absorb without question. Without realizing it, we build a life based more on adaptation than authenticity. What Frankl would call existential emptiness manifests himself precisely when these structures begin to be questioned. The silent question that emerges is not just what do I want to do, but what answer am I giving my existence? At 30, something starts to change, not always dramatically or visible. It can be subtle discomfort, an inexplicable restlessness, a feeling that certain choices no longer make sense. It is the call of responsibility, the confrontation with the finitude, the recognition that yes, we can choose our attitude, but we cannot escape the consequences of our choices. Superficial friendships no longer support. Relationships based on convenience only lose meaning. Careers chosen only by status or security begin to look like prisons. And all this is not a sign of failure. It is the beginning of authenticity, the beginning of a more mature relationship with freedom. But this transition is rarely quiet. Frankl noted that many try to escape this call through distractions, conformism, or determinism. They prefer to believe that they are just products of the past, victims of circumstances or parts in a game they cannot control. True freedom scares, because it is accompanied by responsibility. And responsibility implies asking himself constantly, what is the meaning of this choice? The question is not theoretical, it is visceral. This is not abstract philosophy, but how you respond to the alarm you play every morning. How to react when a relationship becomes difficult, how to face the limitations of your work, how to deal with unfulfilled expectations. In each of these moments, his last freedom is present, pulsating. Have you ever felt this inner call? That voice that questions not only your choices, but the meaning behind them? Perhaps this is the time to listen more carefully, for life after 30 can really begin when we stop seeking only comfort and we seek meaning. Imagine crossing a dense forest without map. In the first kilometers, the excitement of the discovery can mask the lack of direction. But as time goes on, the need for guidance becomes more acute. Taking any path no longer seems enough. It takes a path that makes sense. This is the metaphor of life after the 30th. The terrain becomes more complex. Decisions have more visible consequences. And the need for meaning intensifies. Viktor Frankl described this phase as an inevitable confrontation with the existential issues that many prefer to postpone. Until this moment, we may have lived what he called conformism, doing what others do, or totalitarianism, doing what others send. We built an identity based more on adaptation than on internal values. The social role has overlapped the person. The mask was confused with the face. It is precisely when this structure begins to prove insufficient that the true nature of freedom reveals itself, not as absence of boundaries, but as a response capacity. Frankl insisted that being free does not mean living without restrictions, but choosing our attitude towards them. We are not free from conditions, but free to position ourselves before them. This understanding changes everything. The career that looked like a prison becomes a field of possibilities when we realize that we can choose how we exert it, even if we cannot change it immediately. The relationship that seems stagnant reveals new dimensions when we take responsibility for us in it. The life that seemed predetermined opens in bifurcations when we understand that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in this space lies our power to choose. At 30, this space becomes more visible, more necessary, more urgent. The consequences of past choices already manifest. Time no longer seems infinite. Finitude presents itself not as a threat, but as an invitation to authenticity. As Frankl said, "It's not what we still expect from life, but what life expects from us." And what does life expect? Not a perfect route, but an authentic answer. No absence of doubt, but courage to question. Not absolute certainties, but openness to meaning. This is the paradox of freedom after 30. The more we accept our responsibility, the more free we become. Have you ever wondered what you are responding with your daily choices? Not the big decisions, but those small, almost automatic, that define their character more than the statements at crucial times. Perhaps this is the time to stop and observe. Life is always asking questions, and each choice is an answer. At 30, many of us already carry invisible scars. Not just the pains the world saw, but those that were kept in the silence of choices that weren't really ours, of paths that we follow for inertia, of values we adopt without question. And it is at this moment that the existential mirror begins to show something that we might prefer not to see: the distance between who we are and who could be. Viktor Frankl would call this confrontation existential emptiness, a feeling that something essential is missing, even when all material needs are satisfied. It is a void of meaning, a hunger for meaning that no external success can quench. Before 30, we may have tried to fill this void with achievements, pleasures, or possessions. Then it begins to be clear that the void is not filled, but transformed when we find meaning. It is as if until this moment we had lived mainly out, seeking recognition, accumulating experiences, building an image. The psyche was focused on social adaptation, what Frankl would call dimension of terror. But after 30, a silent force pulls us inside. It is the so-called dimension of being. Not only what I have or what I do, but who am and what a sense of meaning. This inner movement is rarely quiet. It can come as a middle-aged crisis, professional burnout, breakage relationships, or simply as a difficult restlessness to name. What do these manifestations have in common? These are invitations to exercise our most fundamental freedom, to attribute meaning to our experience. Frankl insisted that the meaning cannot be given or prescribed. It needs to be discovered by each person in each unique situation. There is no universal meaning manual. There is only individual responsibility to answer the questions life makes us. And after 30, these questions become more insistent, more complex, more inescapable. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In this space is our power to choose our answer. In our answer are our growth and our freedom. This phrase, often attributed to Frankl, captures the essence of freedom that reveals itself more clearly at this stage of life. Not an abstract but concrete freedom. Not just freedom of external circumstances, but the inner freedom that no one can take us. This freedom manifests itself in three fundamental ways. Frankl identified: freedom to create, through work and action; freedom to experiment, through love and appreciation; and freedom to choose our attitude towards inevitable suffering. After 30, these three dimensions gain new contours, new emergencies, new possibilities. The work is no longer just a means of survival or status, and is questioned as an expression of values. Relationships are no longer evaluated only by pleasure or convenience, and are seen as fields of meaning. And suffering, whether related to limitations, losses, or frustrations, is no longer just avoided, but a call to transcendence. Have you ever wondered what sense your professional choices really express? Or what values support your most important relationships? Or what attitude have you taken on the inevitable difficulties? These are not theoretical questions. It is the portals for concrete freedom that life after 30 invites us to exercise. The paradox of this freedom is that it is not realized in the absence of restrictions, but in the presence of meaning. The more sense we find, the more free we become. Not because limitations disappear, but because our ability to respond to them expands. As Frankl said, When we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Perhaps one of the biggest challenges after the 30 is precisely this: to recognize the boundaries of what we can change externally and discover the vastness of what we can transform internally. Not for conformism, but for authenticity. Not for resignation, but by responsibility. This is the last freedom, which no one can take us unless we deliver it. At 30, many of us have made significant choices: career, relationships, place of life, decisions that shaped one way and closed others. It is common for a nostalgia to arise for the unlocated possibilities, a feeling that we may have limited prematurely, that life could be different if we had chosen other ways. Viktor Frankl understood this feeling, but invites us to a deeper perspective. True freedom, he said, is not in keeping all doors open indefinitely. It is in making conscious choices and finding meaning in them. It is not having infinite possibilities that makes us free, but the ability to make us deeply commit to what we choose. It is as if, until 30, freedom was mainly experienced as the absence of restrictions. Then it reveals itself as the ability to create meaning within limits. What seems contradictory is actually complementary. The first form of freedom gives us amplitude. The second gives us depth, and it is the depth that transforms choices into destination. Frankl used the sculptor's metaphor to explain this idea. The artist does not only create adding material, but mainly removing the excess. Each chisel blow is simultaneously a choice and a renunciation. What emerges is no less than it could be, but exactly what it should be. Similarly, our life choices don't limit us when they are authentic. They reveal who we really are. This transformation in the way of experiencing freedom brings with it a change in the relationship with responsibility. Before 30, we may see it mainly as obligation, burden, or limitation of freedom. Then we begin to understand what responsibility is: literally the ability to answer. And answering is what makes sense to freedom. Answer what? To the unique call that each situation represents. Frankl believed that life is constantly asking us non-metaphorical but concrete questions. Each circumstance, every relationship, every challenge is a question we are called to answer, not just with words but with actions, decisions, attitudes. Life after 30 is an increasingly conscious sequence of these answers. And here is the most important revelation. When answering, we are not just reacting to the world, we are creating ourselves. Each choice is not just about what we do, but about who we become. The freedom to choose is ultimately the freedom to self-care. As Frankl said, ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life, but rather recognizes that he is being questioned. This understanding radically changes our relationship with life choices. It is not just about seeking the most enjoyable, safe, or recognized way. It is about finding the path that allows us to express our deepest values, that allows us to be who we feel that we should be, which transforms restrictions into opportunities to manifest our humanity. Have you noticed how sometimes the most limiting situations reveal the best you are? How would challenges that would never choose voluntarily end up showing strengths that you didn't know how to possess? This is the paradoxical freedom that Frankl discovered in concentration camps, and that applies to a lesser extent to all the restrictions we find in life after 30. It is not the absence of boundaries that makes us free, but the discovery that within any limit we can still choose our attitude. And this choice, however small, has the power to transform not only the experience of the situation, but the own person we are. As Frankl said, when we are not able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Life after 30 is this constant challenge of transformation, not only external, but especially internal. Not only adaptation to the world, but meaning creation. Not only reaction, but answer. And responding, in the deepest sense, is the supreme act of freedom. This is what makes us humans. At 30, many people feel the weight of the should. It should be more professionally established. It should have already found a partner, should have children. It should have their own home. I should know exactly what I want. This pressure, partly socially and inside, can create a sense of failure or inadequacy. even when externally everything seems to be sent. Viktor Frankl would offer a different perspective on these owners. For him, there is only a true existential duty to respond authentically to the questions that life asks us. Do not match external expectations or arbitrary schedules, but discover the unique meaning of each unique situation. As he wrote, each man is questioned by life, and he can only respond to life by responding for his own life. This change of perspective is liberating. Instead of comparing your trajectory with standardized models, you question, what is the meaning of my particular path? What is life specifically asking me at this time? What values can I express through the circumstances I meet? It's not about ignoring responsibilities, but finding your personal response to them. The difference seems subtle, but completely transforms the experience of freedom after the 30th. Instead of feeling divided between external impositions and internal desires, you begin to realize that true division is between fear-based choices and meaning-based choices, between decisions that seek approval and decisions that express values, between paths that only avoid pain and paths that create meaning. Frankl noted that many people, when experiencing existential emptiness, try to fill it in three main ways: search for pleasure, search for power, or absolute compliance with social norms. These strategies may work temporarily, but do not solve the fundamental question of meaning. After 30, these escapes tend to show their limitations more clearly. Pleasure, when sought directly as an ultimate goal, tends to empty. Power, when not at the service of a greater purpose, becomes only exercise of control. And compliance, when it does not reflect authentic values, becomes an invisible imprisonment. None of these strategies satisfies the deepest need of the human being, the need for meaning. It is this need that emerges hard after 30, often disguised as other issues. Dissatisfaction with work may not only be about conditions or remuneration, but about lack of purpose. The crisis in the relationship may not only be about specific problems, but about the absence of shared meaning. Generalized anxiety may be the symptom of a life that does not express essential values. Frankl would call this neurogenic neurosis, the suffering that is born not from traditional psychological conflicts, but from unresolved existential issues. And its therapeutic proposal, logotherapy, does not seek to eliminate tensions, but turn them into growing through the discovery of meaning. After 30, this transformation becomes increasingly necessary. But how to find this meaning? Frankl identified three main paths: through creation, what we give to the world for work and action; through experience, what we receive from the world for love and appreciation; and through the attitude we assume in the face of inevitable suffering. None of these ways is privileged. Each person at every moment needs to find out what his own is. Have you wondered which of these paths is most available to you now? What can you create that has genuine meaning? What can experience with true presence? What attitude can assume in the face of limitations that cannot change? These questions have no definitive answers, but the question itself is already exercise of fundamental freedom. As Frankl said, freedom is not the last word. Freedom is only part of history and half the truth. Freedom is only the negative side of a phenomenon whose positive side is responsibility. In fact, freedom risks degenerating in mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibility. This is the great discovery of life after 30. Freedom and responsibility are not opposite, but complementary. The more responsibility we assume for our choices, the more free we become. Not because circumstances change, but because our ability to respond to them expands. This is the last freedom, to which no one can take us unless we deliver it voluntarily. There is a moment in life, after the 30, in which we realize that some doors really closed, paths we don't follow, choices we didn't make, versions of ourselves that we didn't develop. This perception can bring nostalgia, regret, or even an identity crisis, as if part of who we could have been lost hopelessly. Viktor Frankl would offer a different perspective on this feeling of loss. For him, nothing we really live is lost. Each experience, every choice, every significant moment is preserved in what he called eternal past. As he writes in Search of Sense, having been is also a way of being, perhaps the safest. This idea transforms our relationship with time. The past is no longer just something that has been left behind and becomes a permanent deposit of meaning. The choices we made do not eliminate possibilities. They create realities that nothing can erase. The question is no longer, what could it have been? But what is the meaning of what it really was? This change of perspective is deeply liberating. Instead of lamenting paths not traveled, we can honor the uniqueness of the path we really follow. Instead of dividing between multiple imaginary lives, we can integrate all the dimensions in the concrete life we are living. Nostalgia gives way to gratitude. Repentance becomes wisdom. Frankl illustrated this idea with the farmer's metaphor. During the year, the farmer works, plants, reaps. When winter arrives, he can look at his barns. What has been harvested is safe, regardless of what the future reserves. Likewise, what we live with meaning is preserved in the barn of existence, immune to the uncertainties of the future. This understanding changes our relationship with life choices after the 30th. It is no longer a question of keeping all options, open for fear of losing, but of committing deeply to what we choose, knowing that nothing valuable is lost. This is not about finding the perfect way, but of creating meaning in the path we are going through. Freedom from this perspective is not being able to choose everything indefinitely, but to choose in depth what really matters. As Frankl said, living means taking responsibility for finding the right answer to life's problems and fulfilling the tasks that life constantly puts to each individual. These tasks change over time. At 30, they are no longer the same as the 20, nor will they be the same as the 40s. Each phase brings their specific questions, their particular challenges, their unique opportunities of meaning. Freedom is not in remaining forever young, but in responding authentically with each stage of existence. One of the hardest questions that arise after 30 is it too late? Too late to change career, to find a partner, to have children, to learn something new, to start over? This question carries the weight of finitude, the awareness that time is not infinite, and that some doors really close with the passage of the years. Frankl, who rebuilt his life after losing everything in concentration camps, would offer a nuanced response. Yes, there are real limitations. No, it's never too late to find meaning, even within these limitations. As he wrote, what matters is not what we expect from life, but what life expects from us. This inversion of perspective is crucial. Instead of asking, what can I still achieve? We questioned, what can I offer under current circumstances? Instead of settling on what was lost, we focus on what is still possible. Not for naive optimism, but for existential responsibility. Because even in the most limiting situations, we have the fundamental freedom to choose our attitude. As Frankl discovered in the fields, everything can be taken from a man except one thing, the last of human freedoms. Choose his own attitude in any set of circumstances. Choose his own way. This freedom is not abstract. It is concrete, practical, every day. It is present in each interaction, every decision, every moment we ask ourselves, how will I answer this? And the more we exert this freedom, the more it expands. Not because circumstances change, but because our ability to create meaning within them grows. Have you noticed how some people maintain an inner freedom even in extremely restrictive situations? How can they find purpose and dignity where others would only see limitation? This is the exercise of the last freedom, which no one can take because it does not depend on external conditions. After 30, this freedom becomes increasingly important. Life circumstances, professional, family, physical, can become more defined, less flexible. But the ability to find meaning within these circumstances remains intact or even expands with maturity. It's never too late for this kind of freedom. It is never too late to discover new meanings, to create new answers, to turn limitations into growth opportunities. As Frankl said, when we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This internal change is not resignation, it is responsibility. It is not withdrawal, it is transcendence. It is the recognition that our most essential freedom is not in control of circumstances, but in the way we respond to them. And this answer, however limited it seems externally, has the power to transform not only our experience, but our own being. Life after 30 is this constant exercise of response, not only external expectations, but the inner call, not only to social pressures, but to personal meaning, not only to the circumstances, but to the meaning we can create within them. And in answering, we find that our last freedom is also the most fundamental, the freedom to become who we really are. If today you are at the 30s crossroads, questioning paths, evaluating choices, seeking direction, remember, the most important thing is not the external circumstances but the inner attitude. This is not how apparent freedom you have, but how you exercise your fundamental freedom to choose significant answers. As Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In this space is our power to choose our answer. In doing, our answer are our growth and our freedom. This space exists in you now, regardless of what you have already lived or what is yet to come. It is this space that makes you not just the product of circumstances, but creator of meaning. Life beyond 30 is not the end of possibilities, but the beginning of a deeper relationship with these possibilities. It is not the closure of paths, but the discovery that each path can be traveled with different levels of consciousness. It is not the decrease in freedom, but its transformation into something more mature, more responsible, more authentic. This freedom does not expect ideal circumstances. It does not depend on having all the options open. It does not require absence of limitations. On the contrary, as Frankl discovered in the extreme of prisons, it reveals itself precisely when we face restrictions, when we accept finitude, when we respond to the unique call each situation represents. The last freedom is available to you now, at this time, in these specific circumstances of your life. Not in the hypothetical future when all problems are solved, not in any idealized past when all possibilities seemed open, but here, now, in the space between what happens to you and how you respond. The invitation of life after 30 is not to have more, to do more, or be more in the external direction. It is to deepen, to mean, to answer with more awareness. It is to fully exercise freedom that no one can take from you, the freedom to choose your attitude under any circumstances. As Frankl said, it's not the freedom of something, but the freedom for something. What are you free for? To find unique meaning in your unique situation, to turn limitations into growth opportunities, to express values through concrete choices, to respond to life not only with words but with actions, decisions, attitudes, to create not only external circumstances, but its own inner being. This is the call that emerges after the 30th. It is not a call to conventional success, accumulation, or perfection. It is a call to authenticity, responsibility, meaning. It is an invitation to exercise your last freedom, not despite the circumstances of your life, but through them. And if you accept this invitation, you may find out what Frankl stated, that true freedom is not in the absence of boundaries, but in the ability to create meaning within them. That the authentic realization does not come from corresponding to external expectations, but to respond to the inner so-called. That life, at 30, 40, 50, or at any age, really begins when we decide that we will not only be spectators of our existence, but their conscious and responsible authors.